Well, it's a little after 10, and I will call us the meeting to order. And we'll start with the minutes of the last meeting. So, Jim, you're up.
All right. Vice President Billy Shotpouch called the Goingsnake District Heritage Association meeting to order at 10:40 a.m. with 18 members and guests present. Secretary Jim Terry read the minutes of our last meeting on August 20th, and they were approved as read. There was no financial report. Billy Shotpouch announced that our next meeting on November 19th will be online, and that our December meeting and potluck Christmas dinner will be at the Proctor Community Center at 10 a.m. on December 17th. Mary Horse Chief announced a Cherokee cornstalk shoot that will start at 10 a.m. November 5th at the Joe Thornton Archery Range near the Sequoia High School. There will be a meal after the shoot. Mary Adair gave a Cherokee Moment presentation about her ancestors' family history. Rowena Mills was our featured speaker. Her presentation, Native Resources, Salt and Oil in the Cherokee Nation, was very enjoyable. Billy Shotpouch adjourned the meeting at 11:30 a.m.
Thanks, Jim. Are there any additions or corrections for those of you who were present there? If not, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes as read by someone who was present. Okay, I see that Wanda, she's on mute, but she said that she would move for a second. No seconds? David, you were there, weren't you?
Yeah, I was there. I second.
Okay. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. Next is our treasurer's report. I'll turn it over to Rita. And you're muted. Okay.
Whoops. Try again, Rita.
There we go. Okay, the treasury report for this month, Armstrong Bank, the bank balance is $5,169.53, and we had one PayPal of $28.46 from last month. So total today is $5,169.53. At Carson Bank, the balance is $3,209.35 and no PayPal to that account. And the CD, we have interest paid $1.43 and the balance is $8,701.78. And that's it.
Okay. Thanks, Rita. Is there any discussion or questions on the treasurer's report? If not, it will stand approved as given. And now we're always happy to have our Cherokee Moments from Mary Bell.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Jack. This morning, my Cherokee Moments consists of excerpts from the Indian Arrow newspaper that was published at Fort Gibson. And the first issue, and incidentally, this newspaper was microfilmed by the Oklahoma Historical Society and can be found on microfilm there at the History Center in Oklahoma City. The first issue microfilmed was April the 12th, 1888, Volume 1, Number 6, through August the 8th, 1889. And I want to read to you some what I think is interesting information. I love the research in the Old Cherokee Nation newspapers. They're just full of information, and I've always loved researching in them. The Arrow, Tahlequah Indian Territory, Waddy Hudson, manager. Terms, $1 per year, invariably in advance. And I'm going to volume 7, number 24, which is March the 1st, 1895. And these are advertisements that different people put in the Indian Arrow, and I'm sure they appeared in the Cherokee Advocate also. Dr. F.W. Warren, dentist, office over Crafton's Red Front. C.H. Taylor, lawyer, Tahlequah, Indian Territory. Albert A. Taylor, lawyer. S.R. Walkingstick, attorney at law, will practice before all courts in the Cherokee Nation. H.C. Crittenden, lawyer, Tahlequah, Indian Territory. Ridge Pascal, lawyer, Tahlequah, Indian Territory. B.W. Alberti, lawyer, Cincinnati, Arkansas. C.A. Pennington, M.D., Tahlequah, Indian Territory. R.L. Fight, physician and surgeon, medical superintendent of male and female seminaries, physician for National Jail and Insane Asylum, calls answered day or night. And then we go to the articles themselves. Of local interest, Miss Addie Bates, daughter of William Bates, was married Monday night at her home in Wagner to Mr. Edward Scrimshire. Honorable Ed Bushyhead, who is now in San Diego, California, writes that he must have the Arrow, as he gets more news from it than all the other territory newspapers combined. Miss Sadie Dove, formerly of the female seminary faculty, will take the part of Hazel Kirk in a grand charity entertainment at the Fort Smith Opera House this Friday evening. James Nakenhead, well known in this city, was shot and killed by outlaws near Shakota Wednesday. Only meager particulars of the killing could be learned up to the time of going to press. James Nakenhead was Tahlequah's first city marshal, and at the time of his death was an officer of the federal court at Muskogee. He was a full-blood Cherokee, a good man and a brave, fearless officer, and his tragic end is a matter of deep regret. The personal mention column. Miss Minnie Ward returned to Muskogee this week to have her eyes treated by Dr. F.B. Fight. Miss Dora Sanders, who has been attending the Fort Worth Business College, returned home last Monday. Miss May Gardner, who is teaching school at Eureka, spent Saturday and Sunday with Mr. and Mrs. T.W. Triplett. Dan E. Dannenberg, second assistant teacher at the orphan asylum, came down on a visit last Friday, returning Saturday evening. Albert B. Laws, for several months our city baker, was married last Saturday evening to Miss Emma Price, the daughter of our esteemed townsman, John Price. The ceremony took place at 6 p.m. at the Presbyterian Mission, Reverend Hamilton officiating. Mr. Edward Lutz and Miss Mary Heinrich, daughter of our grocery man, Joe Heinrich, were married Tuesday morning at the residence of the bride's father. The ceremony was performed by Father Ketchum of Muskogee. Little Mary McSpadden, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. J.W. McSpadden, has been quite ill for some time. The little daughter of Wilson Sanders has been quite sick, but is now convalescent. And then volume 7, number 29, April the 5th, 1895. A special session of the Supreme Court was called last Tuesday. Judge E.H. Whitmire presiding. Case, Cherokee Nation versus Runabout Askwater, charged with the murder of John Wolfe at a dance in Tahlequah during council. The jury stood 8 for manslaughter and 4 for hanging. The jury was released and a new trial set for the 17th day of May, 1895. Last Saturday was Dennis McNair's 12th birthday, and the celebration of this event at the National Hotel Saturday afternoon will long be remembered by a host of his little friends. And should he leave to be a Methuselah in age, it will never be forgotten by young Dennis. Those present were Johnson Cunningham, Mary McSpadden, Arthur Sanders, Bartow Fight, Van Morgan, Joel Mays, Dick Trent, Harley Barton, Spy Trent, Lelia Morgan, Ella McSpadden, Ada Foreman, Lizzie McSpadden, Gonia Edmondson, Pearl McClellan, Frances Bushyhead, Molly Blackstone, Butler Bushyhead, Josie Blackstone, Mary Morris, Eugenia Eubanks, Ada Eubanks, Laura Ward, and Grace Phillips. Among the birthday presents were the following: a silver hat mark by Lelia Morgan and L.D. Starr, bookmark by Gonia Edmondson, Byron's poems by several of the little girls, and a handsome bicycle by Mrs. Alberti. And of local interest, Mrs. J.H. Cootie has been dangerously ill several days at the residence of Wilson Sanders, but is now improving. Architect Hoffman measured off the ground last Monday for the new building on the corner of Muskogee and Downing Streets to be built by DeWitt Wilson and will be occupied by Ben Johnson, the grocery man. And about town. Miss May Wilson is having 2 nice cottages erected on the hill east of town. Willie Foreman, son of Wadey Foreman, has been dangerously sick for the past week, but is now on the road to recovery. Reverend Dieter and wife of the Baptist church of this place have rented the Mrs. Downing Cottage in North Tahlequah and now occupy the same. Personal mention: Dr. Emmett Starr of Chelsea came in Saturday on business and will remain a few days. Thomas H. Owen, attorney at law of Muldrow, has decided to locate here for the practice of his profession. And then from Claremore, an 18-year-old boy of Mr. Snooks died Thursday. Mrs. T.C. Chambers left Sunday or will visit her mother on Cowskin Prairie. Died suddenly Wednesday morning, the baby of Will P. and Ida Avon. Mrs. Avon did her work as usual early Wednesday morning and went in to dress the baby when she found her dead and cold. The baby had apparently been well and enjoying the best of health. And then, which I find very interesting, and I'd like to learn more about it, I think I need to read all the newspapers. Volume 7, number 31, April the 19th, 1895. The most disastrous fire in the history of Tahlequah, or perhaps the Indian Territory, originated in the stable of John F. Wilson last Monday morning at about 1 o'clock, resulting in the destruction of 18 business houses, 9 offices, and 8 places of residence. The fire was first discovered in the hayloft of the livery stable, but there appears to be no doubt that it was the work of an incendiary. And then some local news. The Arrow extends thanks to the Advocate for the use of their press this week because their press was destroyed in the fire, incidentally. Gene Hightower of Goingsnake District was over this week to view the ruins of the big fire. We are forced this week to thrust upon our readers a half sheet, and we are sure that under the circumstances, they will not complain. Our losses in the big fire were heavy, much of our material being destroyed and a great deal being badly damaged. The burnt district is now alive with teams carrying away the debris and bringing in material for rebuilding, and this before the ground is cold. And that concludes my extraction from the Indian Arrow for my Cherokee moments. There'll be more forthcoming in various newspapers. And so that concludes my Cherokee moments for this morning.
Thanks, Maria. What year was that again?
1895.
Okay. So that's when they had the big fire.
Yes. Yes. And I was really astounded at so much was burnt down. I mean, 18 businesses, 9 offices,
Wow.
and 8 residents. That
Wow.
was a big fire.
It was.
Mhm.
Okay. Very good. Well, appreciate it as always.
You're
Okay.
welcome.
Now, next month, we will be having our Christmas dinner at Proctor. Luke Williams had already set up or arranged for us to have the building on that day. So, okay, are there any other announcements? No other announcements? Well, we're happy today to have Janine Cloud with us as our speaker. She's a Cherokee Nation citizen, and her family is originally from the Stillwell area. She's a Texas native. She's worked for Family Tree DNA since 2011. And so she's a group projects and event coordinator, and she regularly gives presentations on concerning genetic genealogy at national, regional, and local events. And we're very happy to have you with us, Janine. And I will turn it over to you, and I assume that you may want to share your screen. If so, then Andy can arrange that.
Are we good to go on that?
Yep,
All
you're
right.
the host.
Thank you. I found the Cherokee moments really, really interesting. Joel Mays was mentioned, and he regularly gets conflated with my grandfather. My grandfather keeps getting his name, May's name, which he didn't have. And I have a bone to pick with him at Star because he put in Cherokee by blood, my great-grandfather's middle name is Cairo, Charles Cairo Cloud, when it wasn't. And so now everybody uses that source because there's no other written source with his middle name. So, so that's pretty interesting to me. Let me get.
So David, are you going to correct that?
Okay, can everybody see? Or do I need to switch where I'm showing?
Yes, we can see. Thanks, Janine.
You
Yeah.
can see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Okay. So my paternal grandfather, Joel Bryant Cloud, not Joel Bryant Mays Cloud, but Joel Bryant Cloud, was a Cherokee citizen, and he was born in 1888 in Stillwell. So that's why I was listening really carefully to that 1895 stuff, because he was still pretty young then. And 3 of his 4 grandparents were born in Indian Territory too. And this is my whole family here. His older brother, his daughter, The couple here is Maddie Cloud Shoto and Frank Shoto. And those are the Shotos of the trapper fur traders, descendant of the founder of St. Louis, although not the moneyed side. It's older brother, myself and my parents, my dad, my uncle. The one with the large cabbage is Uncle Chief. He's actually Clyde Clifton Cloud, and I did not know that he actually had a name other than Chief until I was a teenager. And he's just always called Chief. Now, if you go on Ancestry.com, you may see the picture to his right with the lady and the gentleman in a number of places, including Chief Charles Renatus Hicks, which since Chief Hicks was born in the late 1700s and died just as cameras were coming into use, I don't really understand how anybody could make that mistake, but they do. But that is actually Sarah Townsend Cloud and James Lomner Cloud. So when I see Cleta's name there, I'm like wondering if there's a connection to the Townsends, because my great grandmother's first husband's name was Townsend. So that's my bona fides. Here's the enrollment card. You can see was in the Flint district, and there's my grandfather there, Joel B. And you can see that my great grandmother was 3/4, my great grandfather was 1/16, and that made all the children 13/32, which gets pretty awkward with blood quantum as you go down the line for the children. But here's my great great grandfather and great great grandmother. My great great grandfather was white. This was also Flint district. And you can see he was enrolled, but given citizenship as originally Cherokee by blood, which was a mistake, and they fixed that pretty quickly to intermarriage. But not too long after that, there was the Supreme Court decision of the Cherokee Nation and Daniel Redbird, and so he was removed from the rolls. So just a caution to anyone doing research in that particular time frame, just because somebody's on the rolls doesn't necessarily mean that they stayed on the rolls. In fact, one of his children was murdered between the time that he testified before the commission and the time that citizenship was granted. And a few years later, they took him off of the rolls and sent him a letter to tell him that he was taken off of the rolls because he died. I'm not really sure how he was supposed to have read that letter, but that's, bureaucracy in action. My 3 times great grandparents, July and Tawny, came from North Carolina to the Goingsnake district. So I was going through images and had not realized that they were in the Goingsnake area. And here's my lineage, so you can kind of see what kind of a patchwork I have all over the place, with the direct maternal line, my grandfather's direct maternal line being the most recent blood. So they're kind of all over the place, which makes DNA testing pretty interesting with that. Which brings us to DNA. How many of you have done any DNA testing? Has anybody done any DNA testing? Okay. Well, let's talk about what DNA is and what it does. The first thing I want to mention is that while you can prove native ancestry with DNA testing, it's very difficult to disprove it, because we have the different kinds of DNA, and if it doesn't show up on one or the other and it's too far back, it might not show up on the one. We'll go into more detail on that, but I think that's really important to talk about to start with, because some people go into it and don't realize that they might not get exactly what they're looking for. There are various types of DNA. There are 4 types of DNA and 3 types of DNA tests. Where mitochondrial DNA is one that everybody has. We get it from our mothers. It's in the mitochondrion, which is outside the nucleus of the cell. It works with our bodies to create energy. And then we have autosomal DNA, and this is the one if you've done like an Ancestry or MyHeritage or 23andMe, this is the autosomal test. This is the one where you get 50% from each parent. And you get a set of 22 from 22 autosomes from each parent. They look sort of like this. To me, they look kind of like mosquito larvae, but they're actually our chromosomes. And we have the X chromosome. Everyone has an X chromosome. Ladies, we get one from each parent, while men get a Y chromosome from dad to go with that X chromosome. And each one of them does a different thing in DNA testing. Now, as I said, mitochondria, both men and women have it. And so everybody can test mitochondrial DNA, and you got it from your mom. Men do not pass it to their children. So if you want your mtDNA, it's only going to be your mother's line. It's actually got its own genome. It's the only type of DNA that has its own genome. It's really kind of almost like a parasite that's been absorbed into our bodies. The big thing about it is that it does not recombine. What does that mean? It means it does not mix together with other people's DNA. So that mitochondrial line is pure, going straight back for thousands of years to your maternal matriarch. It doesn't pick up any information along the way. So if you do your mtDNA, it's not going to tell you anything about your mother's father's mother or your father's mother, just your mother's line. And in doing so, we get what's called a haplogroup, which is a designation that's given to people who have similar ancestry, and it's tied to both time and place. It kind of tells you about when that particular group developed and then about a location on that. And then Y DNA, only men can test this because only men have Y chromosomes. And unfortunately, because we could sell a lot to ladies because they really want to test it. And men do not pass it to their daughters, so women don't have Y chromosomes to pass to their children. It also does not recombine or mix together. So a Y test is not going to tell you anything about your father's mother's father or your mother's father unless you test the right person. It's only going to be father's 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 father. It doesn't get any other information. And it also gives information about those genetic origins, geographic origins, where a particular lineage came from. There are two types of Y tests. One is called an STR, and that's a short tandem repeat, and it's kind of we call it a stutter mutation. And that's where you count the number of times that particular grouping repeats at a place on the Y chromosome. And they're displayed as a numeral. And then those numerals are compared against databases, and they form patterns so that you can see who matches and closely. And it can be useful for confirming a genetic surname or revealing other surnames that are involved. And then we have Y-SNP testing, which is the single nucleotide polymorphism. And that's a change at one single location. Instead of having a motif that repeats, it was one thing and now it's another. And that shows your position on the haplotree, which the haplotree arranges all of the information in phylogenetic order, meaning grouping everyone who is related together. You can think of it as a big pedigree chart, and each of the entries on it represent a family. And as you go farther down, it's like the more recent in time that it goes. And there's a test called Big Y 700 that I'm going to mention here, and it is a really popular test because it includes the most information that you can get. It covers about 16 to 22 million base pairs on the Y chromosome. Now, it probably doesn't mean very much to you, but it is a very large test. It produces a very large data file, and it identifies both those SNPs that I was talking about, some that are known and already on the tree that other people who've taken the test and other tests have discovered, and then ones that are private to your specific line, ones that identify your specific lineage. And it confirms those predicted haplogroups, so it helps say, yes, indeed, you really are from this particular line. And then it has helped build what is a global haplotree, which is Family Tree DNA has the largest Y haplotree in the world. So if you think of that as kind of like, if you're familiar with like WikiTree or Family Searches tree, it's kind of like that, only it's DNA. So everybody's contributed to that. And this test provides information on the migration path of that paternal line, where they came from, and then down to your specific branch. This test includes what we call a Y111, which is those STRs, plus it includes some additional STRs. So if you were to go to our website and say, okay, I want the STRs so I can get that matching, but then I also want, you know, the individual family stuff, you just buy this one product, it's got everything. But there are, you can do the other tests, the STR tests, and then upgrade later. So when you're looking at matches, you're going to get a list that looks something like this. I've blocked out some names here so that, you know, for privacy, but you can see, you know, how many markers the person tested, how many mismatches you have, and you know, how many differences, if they've done big Y, how many differences there, and then that haplogroup. And these haplogroups are kind of like addresses. They're kind of like GPS things, GPS signatures on that tells you where that is on that haplotree. Now, note here, there's an exact match. Now, the top one is actually my half-brother. My half-brother was he was born Cloud, but he was adopted by his, not adopted, but they changed names to their stepfather's name, because in Texas in the late 50s, if you didn't have the same name as your mother, there was some stigma there. So down the road, 100 years down the road, people looking at this lineage are going to go, well, why does he match when he's got a different name? And this is one of the reasons why. But if you can see, there's Johnson's, Clouds, and all that means is that every one of these people shares a common paternal ancestor at some point, and it's just a matter of figuring out where that ancestor is. And theoretically, the more markers that you match, the more likely it is that that ancestor is in a recent time frame. Well, with this one, we have Reinhardt here, who was an exact match. So I was really excited to get that match. I thought, okay, that's an odd surname to have connected with Cloud, but you know, we just never know. And then he's got, this is his haplogroup. And as we go on and we do big Y testing and get more information, we see that he's way up top. Now, just a side note, when you look at our haplotree, like if you go to familytreedna.com and click in the footer and look at the Y haplotree, there's going to be these little numbers to the side. Let me get my laser pointer. These little numbers here to the side. That's how many branches are underneath there. That's how many pedigree entries are under each of those. And so, for example, you know, the top one has 32, and the next one has 8 under it, and so on. And you can see this one up here, and my timing's off. Sorry about that. And then we have this one down here that has 22 branches below it. And so here's my uncle who tested for me, and my half-brother. And then we have these other two who are really closely matched. They're only off by 1. And then we have this one who's off by 2. And then here's the exact match. He's way up here. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because you get the STR matches and you're looking at how closely related the Y testers are, but it may not be exactly what it appears to be. You may have to get that additional information and see where that goes. That's why the big Y test is important. And it gives you something like this. This is the block tree where it's makes it even more clear how it's like a pedigree chart. Sorry about that. So you can see the various splits in these lines. Most of the clouds here do go back to an immigrant ancestor from about 1641, and we're just trying to make connections with him. And then we have some other folks that ended up, like this one right here, Mr. Land. He knew that his surname wasn't going to be matching because his third great grandmother was pregnant when she married Mr. Land. He married her knowing that she was pregnant. And so he had no idea what that lineage was, and was interested to discover all the Clouds and Johnsons around him. Now, autosomal DNA is, like I said, it's the one that's inherited from both parents, 50% from each parent. Now, it has what's called random recombination. So that means that it's all mixed together, and they pass down 50% of the mixed together DNA that they got from their parents, who got from their parents and from their parents. So as you go back, it gets smaller and smaller. Now, siblings do not inherit the same 50% from their parents. You get 50% from each parent, but it's not the same 50%. So if you're using DNA testing for your research and you're using those matches, make sure to test siblings, because unless they're identical twins or triplets, they're going to have different match lists. There'll be an overlap of the closer matches, but they won't have all the same. Now, this goes back about 5 to 6 generations because of that division I mentioned. If it's 50%, 25%, 12.5% going back that you get from each generation, the farther back you go, the more likely it is that you're going to miss out on one of those ancestors, because at 5 or 6 generations, we're looking at like a percent of that person's DNA. Both men and women can test it. Obviously, everyone has autosomal DNA. And one of the things that's really useful for is identifying candidates to do Y and mtDNA testing for lines that you don't have a direct connection to. So like Y DNA is only one direction and only men can take it. So if you're looking for a specific Y ancestor, you have to find the right person to take that test. mtDNA, if you're looking for a specific ancestor and it's that direct, you have to find the right person. And the autosomal matches can provide you with those candidates. And then what most people know this for is the estimate of ancestral origins of all those ancestors mixed together. It's all blended together. And like I said, it's that 50% that you get from each parent, and it's all jumbled together with random recombination. Now, there's a term called admixture that you might hear. And what that means is when parents from different populations, distinguishable populations, have children, it brings those populations together. So for example, when my when my full-blood Cherokee second great grandmother got with my half Cherokee second great grandfather, then that brought in that additional population. And so out of the 3/4 Cherokee, 1/4 probably Scottish, which that's when you start getting all that mixture together. And it can be plotted on a chromosomal diagram like this. You can see this is all the pink on here is the Amerindian, and you can see what chromosomes that you inherited that have the native with it, or whichever population, like the blue is European. And this is not uncommon. My grandfather was 13/32, which was about 40%. And so made my uncles about 20% blood quantum, but the actual results show that they inherited much less. He had like about 6.5, 7% of that shows up in his autosomal DNA. So if you get a test and you look at the results and you think that you're supposed to show more Native American than you do, that's because of that random recombination. Now, how can DNA help you find those Native ancestors? That's the big question, right? I can't tell you how many times I had people call and say, I'd never forget it when I was probably maybe a month into my employment. A woman called, she's like, I'm going to find out how much Indian I am so I can get a check from the government. I'm like, yeah, it's not how it works. Sorry. No, another guy was going to get his kids put through school. I'm like, yeah, college. I'm like, good luck with that, because that's not how it works. So how can you tell by DNA that someone is Native? How can you tell what those origins are? Well, they show in autosomal ancestral mixture, and they show in the Y and mtDNA haplogroup that I mentioned. This is what the breakdown can look like with the autosomal mixture. And then the haplogroup, there are only limited haplogroups that that originated in the Americas. We'll talk more about that in just a sec. So these are the 3 ways that you can find that Native ancestry. I've talked about haplogroups. What does that mean? What is a haplogroup? Well, it's a genetic group that shares common ancestors, and either on the Y or MT line. You get them both on both, and it is put together in a phylogenetic fashion, and they represent those migration paths. So, for example, haplogroup A originates in Africa and spreads from there. And then haplogroup Q is a Y DNA one, and that goes from like the Nordic countries into the Americas. So just because you have haplogroup Q doesn't mean that you're Native. It has to be certain ones because of that migration path. And they're arranged in the haplotree. Now on mtDNA, there are only 5 haplogroups that originated in the Americas: A, B, C, D, and X. And you can see them on the map here. The X one goes up here. It's usually associated more with the First Peoples, so the Canadians, that kind of thing. Native American Y is under CM217 and QM3, and the C generally came in through California here, although there is some over in the Nova Scotia and this area over here in Canada. And then Q goes all the way down into South America. Now, when you're looking at autosomal DNA, how do you know what populations there are? Well, there's something called a reference population. So what the test does is it takes a key, a group of reference populations that are specific to areas that have been, like, they must have like their 4 great-grandparents and great-grandparents from a certain area. We try to get them as pure as possible. And it takes that as a standard to match your DNA against it. And they try to get the best documentation possible. And results are limited to those, only to those populations. So say, for example, if you know that you had ancestry from, say, from a really small country, if that population isn't in the list of reference populations, it's not going to show up in the results, because it can't show a result that there's not a reference population for. And what I usually try to compare it to is, the children's toy that's like this big sphere and it's got holes in it. Some of them are stars, some of them are squares, some of them are circles and all that. And you have these pegs and you start trying to fit the pegs into the holes. Well, those holes are the reference populations and the pegs are your DNA, and it gets it to the one, like this particular spherical one might only fit in this box. It doesn't mean that it's squared, that box one, but it'll only fit there. So it's the closest one to it. So for example, in my personal results, it shows some of the Amerindian coming from Mexico. Well, we know that the Cherokees were not in Mexico, but it's the closest population that looked like it. Because those are really limited. So you can see down here the North Mexico and Central America, which is, you know, obviously not tribal, but it's the closest population to it. Now, each company has a different set of reference populations, and so what you get at one company might be different at another company. So for example, this is the My Origins 3 at Family Tree DNA. We have it going all the way to Amazon and in Argentina and Chile, North America. The problem is that in North America, there is so much admixture. There's so many tribes that have been intermarrying for hundreds of years that it's difficult to get a population that's pure enough to use. And I hate to use the word pure because that gives weird connotations, but it's true when you're talking about trying to match a population to it, you know, it skews it if you have other ancestry in there. Then this one, like I said, this one's mine. And then at MyHeritage, they have Mesoamerican and Andean with like 146 genetic groups under there, plus indigenous Amazonian and then generalized Native Americans. So they have a really interesting thing there, and they give me the highest percentage of any of the companies. And then this is what mine breaks down to here, that. And then at 23andMe, they have a little different take on it. They go with the regions like, you know, Northeast, Plains, Central, Southwest. How they got those populations, how they assigned those populations, I'm not really sure, because it's North American tribes haven't given enough samples to really do that. So they must be doing some extrapolating somewhere. And then this is what mine looks like there. I'm like at just under 5% with 4.3, and then, you know, 0.3% there. And then Ancestry has regions, they've got the most regions, and they include like Cuba and Haiti and stuff like that, because there's natives all over the place. So they have the most populations there. And I get 2% Mexico. So you know, it's kind of a crapshoot as to what you get there, but it does show up. Living DNA is a company that's based out of UK, and they're really new to the game, but they started with just populations, and they really focused on the UK. So their Native Americas is a little broad, but they still have them. So like with the Great Britain stuff, I have all the way down to like Northumbria. I can't trace anything to Northumbria, but they've got Mesoamerica, which is a pretty broad brush. And to be honest, this is probably about as accurate as anything else. Now with mitochondrial DNA, as I mentioned, it tells you nothing about your male ancestors. So no mitochondrial test is going to tell you anything other, like if the man takes the test, it's going to tell you about his mother. But anytime a male is in that line, so even if you're going back 6 generations to that 6th, 7th, 8th great grandmother, however far you're going back, if her native ancestry came from her father, it's not going to show up in this test. It's only that direct maternal line, and that's because it does not pick up that information. It changes pretty slowly as well. So it goes back a lot farther, and it can make finding where you connect with your match is kind of difficult. Y-DNA is not going to tell you anything about female ancestors because females don't have Y chromosomes. It will tell you about a female's father, but it's not going to tell you anything about the female. And it's only that direct line. It can't distinguish between brothers in recent generations. So like my uncle and my half brother test, and they've got exactly the same haplogroup. But if you go back several generations, if you go back, 300 or 400 years, Y-DNA can tell which son that it came from there because it changes as time goes on. And as I mentioned before, only men can take it, and it has to be that direct paternal descendant. If at any point on that line something came from the mother, it's not going to show up in that Y-DNA. X-DNA, I'm sure everybody's heard of X-DNA, but it's really weird. It has a specific inheritance pattern, and it's kind of jumps around. Men only get it from their mother, so it can be a little more useful for men, since you know that if you have an X match, that X match is only on your mother's side. It cannot be on your father's side unless they're related a different way. But women, since we get it from both parents, the one from dad is usually his whole one from mom is usually her two mixed together with that random recombination, although sometimes it's a whole one for one or the other of the whole one. So it's really bizarre and difficult to do, but it can rule out people. It doesn't have a haplogroup though, and it doesn't have it's not measured for ancestry informative markers, so it's not particularly useful in tracing native ancestry. It can be useful in solving specific genealogical problems, but it's not going to really help you with native ancestry. Now, autosomal DNA, as I mentioned, it halves each generation, and as you go back, it's the amount of DNA that is available for you to inherit from a specific ancestor gets smaller and smaller, and the chances of you not getting it increases. And that recombination makes it difficult to tell how much you're going to get, and siblings can get different amounts. And as I said, you can't get an origin for a population that's not there. So if you missed a segment from that specific ancestor, it's not going to show up in your results. Just a side story about how that random recombination works. I have a cousin who we're connected on paper. He's like a fourth cousin once removed or something like that. His second great grandfather and my third great grandfather were brothers. So we know this, it's documented on paper. And he tested, but he doesn't match me. He matches my uncles, both of my uncles who've tested, and he matches 4 of my first cousins who've tested, but not me and not my half siblings. So he matches the children of my dad's other siblings, but not my dad. So that tells me that my dad didn't get enough of those segments, those connecting segments, to pass down to his children. So that's to tell you, be sure and test more than one person, because if I had been trying to prove that connection with just that one test to match the two of us, I would have missed it because we just didn't get it. But my cousins and my uncles did. And as I mentioned, random recombination, that's the name of the game. It's like shuffling those cards together. Now, full siblings can have different amounts. Now, here is my brother, my half brother, and my half sister. Is my half brother's results here and my half sister right here. We share the same father. We're all eligible. I'm not sure whether they've enrolled or not, but they're as eligible for citizenship as I am. And yet my sister has zeros. Her second great grandmother is full-blood Cherokee, but she's got zeros because of random recombination. And her brother has this 2%. So that's what I'm saying, is that with autosomal DNA, you can prove it, you can show that it's here, but you can't really disprove it, because just because she's got zeros here doesn't make her any less Cherokee than her brother and me. And so if you're several generations removed from a full-blood Cherokee ancestor, don't be surprised or disappointed if you don't get those percentages there. Or if you have children who test. Like my son has about the same amount as I do, but he got Mexican ancestry from his father's side, which has Native in it as well. So there's not really any way of telling whether he just got my full chunk or whether he got part of it from his dad's side. And that's another thing, is there's not really any way to distinguish between the Latin influences, those Latin American tribes and the North American tribes. And so here's my uncles. They're full brothers, like Quantum 1364th Cherokee. And yet one of them is 11% and one's 4%. So one of the brothers got more segments than the other one did. That's just how the autosomal DNA works. And with my grandfather being about 40%, you would have thought that they would be 20%. But because of the random recombination, they're at these percentages. So for me to prove my case using DNA, it would be pretty complex, which isn't unusual, because at least for those of us outside of that, of the Cherokee lands, we have so many different, we've got that melting pot thing going on. So like as a female, I can only take an empty DNA test. The Native ancestry is on my father's side, although it's not the Y side, but if it were, I couldn't take a Y test, so I'd have to find somebody to do that. So when you're looking here, you can see this line right here is Native, right? My grandfather, his mother, her mother, and her mother. But my uncle couldn't test that because my grandmother, that mtDNA is very European. So I would have to find the right person there. And so this line right here in the paternal line is all European, and that's very, very common. If you go through and you start looking at some of the big names in Cherokee history that are part that were mixed blood, their father, their father's line has the European ancestry. So you would not be surprised to see that Y line be European in origin. So my great grandfather got his from his mother, who got her from her father, who got hers from her mother. So there's no straight line there. It would all depend on finding the right person to test. Now my mtDNA is very European, very, very, we're all pale skin, very, very white. In fact, my mother's maiden name was White, as a matter of fact. It was just so very, very Scotland, don't get us out in the sun kind of thing. But you can target matches to test. Remember I said earlier about using those autosomal matches to test? Well, if you remember when I talked about my third great grandparents, Tawny, who ended up in Goingsnake, she had a daughter named Jenny July, which she had a daughter named Mary Jane Horn, which is my great-great-grandmother. And then she had a daughter from her first marriage named Sarah Jane Townsend, and that's Sarah in her older years. And then she had a daughter who had a daughter who had a daughter who matched me on Ancestry. Well, my line to that particular ancestry goes through those males, so the mtDNA won't work there. But cousin Janice, on the other hand, is that straight maternal line. And it took me about a year to finally get an answer from her, but she did go ahead and transfer over and do mtDNA testing. She's a second cousin once removed, and here's the most recent full-blood Cherokee, and she did that and got that haplogroup. Remember I said A, B, C, D, or X? We got that B2 haplogroup that shows the Native ancestry. So if you're looking at your pedigree and you're trying to figure out how to get DNA proof on, or DNA, not necessarily proof, but you want to see it reflected in those results, look at your matches and see, compare them on your tree to see how that, who's going to be a good candidate for you. Now, my dad's line, you can see that when you get up to Charles Clifton, not Charles Cairo, Mr. Starr, that he looks a little more white than the rest of them. But that haplogroup, the clouds do go back to Europe. It is very European. So no matter that my grandfather was nearly half Cherokee, Y-DNA is not going to show that, because his father's father's father came from Europe. Now, even with the name Cloud, which I've had a lot of people go like, oh, it's Cloud, so you've got to be, that's got to be your name. Well, yeah, but he testified in front of the Dawes Commission that he was white. He was, but that his wife was Cherokee by blood. And if any of you have ever read any of those documents, it just made my skin crawl reading through this. And have you been apart? How long have you been apart for? And all that kind of stuff. It was just embarrassing. But you can see here the citizenship certificate was issued in 1907, and because of this, they said, okay, you're Cherokee by blood, and then they came back later and said, no, you're Cherokee by intermarriage. So transitioning just a little bit, we talked about Y-DNA and how it can show where your ancestors came from. We have a relatively new feature on FTDNA called Family Tree DNA Discover, and you can go to this at discover.familytreedna.com and put in a Y haplogroup, and it shows the origins. So I pulled up one for a Q so that you can see how that kind of goes, and you can see that when it was formed, like the particular person with this haplogroup, that most recent ancestor was around 1900, and it can go back from there. You can see how that path goes. It includes a lot of interesting stuff here, notable connections, migration maps, and everything, including something like this that shows that at some point that he shared an ancestor with this Brazilian that was part of a study. And you can see how far back that goes to like 12,000 BC. There's also one that a lot of people find interesting is ancient connections. So you might wonder, how do we know that only Q is Native American? There's never been any digs in North America and South America that have come up with anything other than haplogroup Q on the Y-DNA. And this is a feature that kind of shows you, like, look at the Spirit Cave mummy and that kind of thing. It shows all these different digs that they came from. So now my message about using matches is that you might not have a clear DNA path, but one of your matches may. And so you want to check those trees to see how you connect and use those for your Y-DNA testing. My issue is that the men that were full-blood Cherokee were either really far back, and so I don't have records of any of their sons. July was his name. I know he was married to Tawny. I know they had one daughter. That's it. There's no other records connections. But if you have those connections, you might be able to do that. Make sure you test the siblings and use their matches as well. Now, as far as tribal enrollment goes, you all probably know this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Even if it shows up in your results, it's almost never adequate. Results aren't going to show any tribal affiliation. There's just very few populations, North America ones. And many of the tribes come from some the same genetic roots, so that DNA looks similar. So like, the California groups are going to look one way, the Eastern Woodlands, the Mohican the the Iroquois area, that's all going to look one way. And as of January 30th, 2020, there were 574 federally recognized tribes. So there's not going to be that many reference populations. There's just not. So you're not going to be able to match to a specific tribe. And then in addition to that, each tribe has its requirements, and the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma just flat out says it. I love the part where it says that we're not able to accept family photos as proof of ancestry, but I have had many people send me photos at work saying, see, don't they look Native? And I'm like, yeah, that's not, again, how it works. Can I just send you the family tree? No, no, you can't send the family tree. So if you're not enrolled, you would want to look for different connections. You're looking to connect to family lines. You probably need to do a lot of paper research first, because you're going to have to find somebody who's already enrolled, somebody who was on the rolls to connect to that line. And because you're probably going back several generations, Y and mtDNA is probably going to be your best choices. But then you might also have to use autosomal to make those connections. From like for cousin Janice, that direct maternal descendant, the mtDNA, she matches me on autosomal. She doesn't match me on mtDNA, obviously, but that's what I want. I wanted that there, so I have that connection. Another thing that you can do, Family Tree DNA has group projects, and the group projects are led by administrators that are volunteers working on their own research, and they're free to join, and they may have prerequisites. For example, we have an American Indian project and we have a Cherokee project. The American Indian project accepts anyone who has Native ancestry or believes they have Native ancestry, while the Cherokee one requires proof of some connection to Cherokee ancestry. And what we do is give them the ability to look at the overall DNA results and analyze them. And there are a number of reasons to join, and one of them is to share research. You can compare beyond just the matching, and you can see with Y-DNA, you can see those matches that are beyond the threshold for them to show up as actual matches. And then you can look at the overall picture of what that data looks like, what that particular region or that particular family looks like. And it helps you recruit testers as well. So if I'm with the Cherokee project, and I understand you have Cherokee ancestry, so let's get you tested. That's a little different from, hey, you want to take a DNA test, because some people are a little still a little skittish about doing DNA testing. And then there's also a group fund that people can donate to help fund tests for other people. And this is kind of one of the benefits that you get from it. You get to see how people line up. And this is from the American Indian Project. And we have the Q and the C, and you can see that the various, we have the surnames here and then their ancestor, and we have everything with the Q. We have everything from, Velasquez, all the way to Kentucky, so there's a variety here of origins. And then haplogroup C has all these. You see all these that are in the Canadian First Nations. That group has done a lot of targeted research in that particular area. So you can see how these people all line up, and how that they're where their ancestors came from. Oh, sorry. mtDNA is a little different because of the way the mutations show, but you can see here the Native American matrilineal. You see all these C's and D's. This is from the Cherokee Project, and we know that these people right here all have Native maternal lines because they have that haplogroup, and these people right here may have Cherokee ancestry, but they've got that H and H haplogroup, which is European. So it would have to be on a different line than that mother's line. But this is a way that you can kind of see, like this one from Cherokee Nation East, etc. You can get that information in a bigger picture. And the types of projects we have are surnames, which helps explore, the evolution of a surname. For example, I have a Griffin project where, because my paternal grandmother's father, whose name was Griffin, and there's like 3 or 4 different points of origin from it. We can tell by looking at that data that, one's from Ireland, one's from Wales, that kind of thing. And then haplogroup projects, I've talked through the whole thing about haplogroups. Those projects group people together who are from the same haplogroup. And then geographic shows regions. So like we have the Finland project for one thing. They've got, 20,000 members, and it kind of gives you a picture of what the genetics look like for a particular area. We've even got it all the way down to like Lawrence County, South Carolina. And then like some societies have them as well. So for instance, if Goingsnake said, okay, we're going to do a DNA special interest group and we want to have our own group to do it, it would fall under that. And then dual geographic uses both Y and mtDNA. Family Finder projects focus on autosomal DNA. So now in summary, if you're going to try to use DNA testing to find to connect with your native ancestry, first you have to specifically identify the person, because I have had so many people come up and say, my grandmother this, or my grandmother or my grandfather that. And you look at their research, and their grandmother was like born in Kansas in 1850 or whatever, and you're like, okay, that's not enough. There's not enough information there. You have to identify that person, and then you have to determine which test is going to get the most information about that ancestor. If it goes back too far, so for like example, if I were trying to get back to the Granny Hopper, autosomal DNA is not going to work on that because it's too far back. So it would have to be a Y or mtDNA test. And since Granny Hopper was female, she didn't have a Y DNA. I'd have to get mtDNA and find, that right descendant there. So then you have to find who to test and then talk them into testing. It's probably good to try to test 2 people, depending on what it is, unless it's somebody that's already an autosomal match to you, so you know that there's that connection. But like if you're trying to find the haplogroup of a particular male, then the Y haplogroup, you might want to test 2 descendants to make sure that one of them didn't have an unexpected paternity, because it's called NPE. Some people call it NPE, not the parent expected, misattributed parentage, that kind of thing. I have one cousin who tested his uncles, and his father didn't match his uncles. And so he discovered at an advanced age of his 60s that had a different father than the brothers, and it took him like 2 years to search down the traveling salesman who actually was the father. I'm not even kidding. And Grandma was alive at the time, and she wasn't talking, she wasn't saying anything. So it took a while there, but that kind of thing can happen, and you're just not necessarily going to know about it. And remember, when you're trying to connect to specific family lines in Cherokee history, those paternal haplogroups may be European. You may not be looking for that Q haplogroup. You may be looking for, like Hicks, Charles Renatus Hicks. His Y line is going to be European, so you would want it to be confirming that way. So you may not necessarily be looking for that native haplogroup. And right now we do have a sale through November 20th, and then we're going to have a Black Friday sale after that. But if you want to purchase something, you can use the code Goingsnake22 to get an extra $10 off of the sale price of a purchase over $59. And that's valid through November 30th. So thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, I don't know how much time we have for questions, but I'm happy to answer what I can. And do I need to stop share?
Okay, we have plenty of time for questions. Would, does anyone have a question? My question is, many of us have tested through Ancestry. Can those be transferred, or the results transferred to Family Search?
Yes, they can. You when you go to our website at Family Tree DNA, in the upper left corner, there's a menu, and you just choose the transfer data. You'll need to download your data from Ancestry or 23andMe, and once you get to that page, it'll tell you the specifics on, you know, which files that we take. We take almost all of them, but there's a couple of them that are a little weird, so we don't take them. And it's free to transfer. You get your matches for free. If you want the My Origins and the, we have a chromosome browser, the chromosome painter, all the advanced tools, it's usually $19 to unlock, but during the sale, it's $9 to unlock that portion of it. And then if you wanted to do any additional testing, you can order it and we just send you a kit to get the swab.
Okay. By the way, Janine has given us a door prize for a DNA test. And I have made a list of everyone who has signed on. So, which I can send out if someone wants it. But Janine, do you want to give me a number between 1 and 18?
7.
The lucky 7 is Mary Bell Chase.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I'm going to I will decline that. I appreciate it. But could you draw someone else's name? I'm just at the state where I'm not able. I'm pretty much confined to a chair in my bedroom. And so I don't see, you know, anything changing right away. And my health is not good. I'm getting elderly. I'll be 88 in December. And so just draw someone else's name, please.
Well, give us a number between 1 and 18 other than 7.
You mean me give the number?
Yes.
Okay. 13.
The lucky 13 is Curtis Rohr. And looks like Curtis has left us.
Where's Curtis?
So we will let him know. And do you, in case he declines, do you want another number, Mary Bell?
Excuse me. Yes. 10.
Let's see. 10 is Patsy Edgar. So if Curtis declines, then it goes to you, Patsy.
What up? Don't let Curtis decline, because his mother was adopted and I've been trying to get him to figure out who her natural parent.
That's great.
Okay. We will do. By the way, Janine, I would be related to you through the McDaniels. And Anna Smith, who's on here, is a direct descendant of Charles Renatus Hicks.
Nice.
So you may be related to some of the others.
Possibly. I don't know. I keep looking at the Townsend and I'm like, you gotta be related to that Townsend. Although Townsend was actually he was Delaware. Solomon Townsend was Delaware, but he had a son with my great grandmother named Jesse. So
Okay,
Cleta,
Townsend is my married name, so I'm not Townsend by blood.
okay.
But Russell Townsend, you may be related to him.
Maybe so. maybe so.
Yeah, he's a Cherokee Nation citizen. And he works for the Eastern Band in their historic preservation office.
Cool.
I have a question, Janine. And it's kind of a, I don't know if it's if you do have a lot of people tested, how do you keep track of their matches? And do you have a good way of kind of, for lack of a better way to say this, managing the data? I mean, I hate to put it in those terms because we're talking about relatives and things like that, but
But that's what it is managing the data. You can do what's called a private project, where you can put all the people that you've tested into one group, and you can see their data that way. You see their information that way. Unfortunately, we don't have where you can sign in one thing and see everybody all at once. What a lot of people will do is download segments and do spreadsheets. There's also a program called DNA Painter, and it's for autosomal DNA, and it allows you to input the information from your various tested people and assign ancestors to it. So I've not personally used it yet, but I know a lot of people who have. And if you've tested several people in your family, it's a good way of finding out which segments can be assigned to what that you inherited from which ancestors.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Janine,
Yes.
this is Wanda. We're not related, but we certainly have a lot of connections. John Horn, who was married to Jane July, was later married to Susan Foreman, and she was my second great grandmother. But I don't come down through that line. I come down through her third husband, who was Jack Cleveland. So not related, but
Shirt tail kin.
definitely lots of connections there.
Shirt tail kin. Yeah, Jeremiah Horn was a character. That was John's father, and he got kicked out of the Quakers for marrying too many Cherokee women. He had like 4 Cherokee wives, and only a couple of them overlapped, I think. And he got kicked out of the Quakers and ended up becoming a Methodist circuit Methodist circuit preacher and tavern owner, and ended up in North Texas and helped found the town of Prosper, Texas, up near Dallas. But I think it's hard to
He was married at one time to one of the Dohertys, and she was a sister to my second great grandmother on that line. So
yeah, there's a daughter back in one of those the marriages and stuff. Like I said, there was like Bryant Ward was my, I want to say, 4th great grandfather, and he's the one that Nancy Ward got her surname from. And I don't descend from Nancy. I descend from his other wife, and it's hard to consider. A lot of people outside don't understand when you go back and you start looking at, getting married by Cherokee law versus white law, and how, women have a lot more control over who they married and who they when they left that relationship. That get all the extra wives in there and stuff, and it's like, no, I'm not from this one, I'm from this one.
Right. I don't know if you know, Janine, but David Hampton is the president of the Association of the Descendants of Nancy Ward. And
Hi there.
Andy, Becky, Rita, they're all descendants of Nancy Ward as well.
My aunt tried her whole adult life to connect us to Nancy, but the closest we could get was to her husband, Brian.
My mother's descended through Bryant Ward. So my great grandmother, that was her great grandfather, her grandfather, one of them.
So we're distantly related.
Yes. And then I'm also, through my father's line, descended from Nancy.
Okay.
So Janine, if
Yes.
David knows a straight maternal line descendant of Nancy Ward, and that woman got her DNA, mitochondrial DNA tested, that would be probably,
I'd pay for it, or the company would pay for it.
okay.
Seriously, we would pay for that, because that would be a huge thing to have Nancy's mtDNA.
Well, I think David, can correct me if I'm wrong, but he has people, because I know several of the descendants that come down maternally through. So David, do you want to work on that with Janine?
Yeah, I'll try to find some good candidates. You know, we had Betty Smith was a good candidate, but she's been dead, and I'm sure some of her sisters will have candidates.
Yeah.
Yeah, there can't be any male along the line in any way.
These are
So-
only female line all the way back to Nancy.
That would be stellar. That would just be, I would be just dancing.
Okay,
And then-
so what about somebody like George Guess, whose father's purportedly a white trader, but there's no documentation to prove it. If there were male line Guess descendants, and they had their Y, correct? They'd have to have their Y tested. If they match the Guess Y, other Guess Y DNA.
Yes, that's what you would want to do there, and that's why I said with a lot of those big name figures like Hicks and Guess and like that, you're not necessarily looking for that native haplogroup. We just have to make sure that the documentation was together to show, okay, this is that European line. There's another name that's escaping me at the moment because I've only had one cup of coffee this morning. So, but in any of those that, like I say, many of them it'll be easier to get the mtDNAs because, that's quite often where the intermarriage came, but getting that Y line, even if it is European, that you can document being from that family can be quite valuable. Because like with Hicks, okay, so Charles Renatus Hicks, it still passed the chief position passed in the family. So it would still, it would also, would connect to more than one level there. And, if anybody's got any of the figures, it's whatever we would certainly want to work on that. Van, I'm drawing a blank right now, but whether it's Eastern Band, Western Band, whatever, and some of them can be pretty far flung. Like my grandfather, it was not, he left when his mother died. He left Indian Territory in 1909 after his mother died, and he went to Washington State. Like he got as far away from Indian Territory, and he put Caucasian or white on all his documentation and didn't pass any Cherokee information down because being Cherokee was not a comfortable thing at that point. Like the seminaries, you were talking about the seminaries and stuff. My aunt said the only time that he spoke Cherokee was when he was drunk, and he spoke Cherokee when he was drunk because it was first language, but they had to not, they forced him not to speak it. So I can understand how you wouldn't necessarily want to be connected with that place anymore if it wasn't exactly great. I mean, and Solomon Townsend was murdered. The uncle was murdered by his father-in-law, a Christie, for picking up mail. Like picked something up at the post office and was going to take it to him. No, you picked up my mail, I'm going to kill you. It was rough times there. So connecting to any of those historical figures, whatever I can do to facilitate that, in the Cherokee Project, whatever we can do.
Yeah.
Roberta
so-
Estes.
so
Is
a mitochondrial question. So in Cherokee, there's supposed to be 7 female maternal clans. Would you expect there to be 7 different mitochondrial groups, or is it two?
No, I would not. I would not. I would expect there to be, because there's only the 5 major branches. Now they might be different subclades under them, and I know that there are some. There might be some C or some B, and the challenge is that because mitochondrial DNA does go back so far, you might have someone who's documented Cherokee back to the 1700s, but beyond that, they might not have actually been Cherokee. That might have come from another line. But it would be interesting to get enough to try to who know the clans, because the clan stuff only passed down so far with a lot of us. Like I have no idea what clan I could be considered because of the way that passes down or didn't pass down. But if you had enough that have that documentation of what those clans were to do that testing and determine whether they're different subclades or whether it's all the same clade, that would be really interesting.
I think that would be very difficult because not that many people know their clans, but also there would be the white mother in there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
For
Exactly.
example, my mother is Cherokee, but she does not have a clan because her mother was white.
See, and you're a perfect example of what I was trying to describe about how challenging it can be to prove or document Native ancestry that way, because if you would want to go autosomal because of that zigzag, because Y DNA is not going to necessarily get it, mDNA is not going to get it, and autosomal, it just depends. But like I said, when cousin Janice came up as my match, I was like, oh my God, she's descended from that line. So, I kept pursuing her to get that test. And if I find anybody else that's from one of the other lines where it was a maternal descendant, I'll be doing the same thing to get that. So if you've done autosomal testing and you can go through your matches and look at their trees, and don't always believe all of them, of course, because some of them can be pretty creative. But finding a candidates to test like that can be really useful.
Yes, but like you said, so many of them, there's a white ancestor in there, and they lose either the Y or the mtDNA.
Yeah, and I don't like with the Y DNA. I think that one is, like I said, is going to be more of a tracing to a specific person, a specific, that particular person whose father may be white. And I guess you could do it with mtDNA as well. But, I mean, with the females as well, but it would be a little bit more difficult. And then if you have older relatives like Maribel, I would encourage you to do an autosomal test at the very least, simply so that information is available.
I have a clan, but I'm not aware of what it is. But on my mother's side of the family, I can go back maternally all the way back to the 1700s. But I don't know what the clan is, even though I know the ancestors back to that time period. So that's always been a mystery to me of what I've always been curious as to what clan it is.
The clanship is fascinating and puzzling. because so occasionally it'll have been written down, but not always. So I guess we're more fortunate than some tribes though, because with the Cherokees having a written language, whereas other tribes didn't necessarily have a written language. We had a little more stuff that was written down that could be passed down. The rest of it's all oral tradition. And at some point when that now everybody wants to be Native American. Everybody wants, I want to be Indian. I'm cool. I know, I feel it in my bones. But there was a huge chunk of time where that was not cool. You hid that. You didn't want that to be revealed anywhere. Even if it wasn't like my grandfather, but a lot of people in there, because there's so much prejudice. Even like in the 90s, like 1991, I went on a trip with up to the Shoshone Reservation in Idaho, and they still had major rivalries, and there's still a lot of discrimination there. So it's not all as, not everybody sees it being Native American as being something desirable still.
Okay, another question. Do you know of a Baker family DNA group?
We do have a Baker group, yes.
Because I can go back to the 1600s to the first Baker immigrant from England, which was a Martin Baker who came into Virginia. So
yes, we have the Baker Project that has yeah, it's not what I want. Nearly 1,500 members in it.
wow.
Yeah. So there's quite a few Bakers, and I'm sure there's more than one origin there. Since Baker is a there's a huge chunk of them that are haplogroup J, which is Middle Eastern, which is interesting. But yeah, there's a number of origins there, whether it be German or English or whatever.
Because my Baker ancestor goes back to Plymouth, England.
To where?
Plymouth.
Plymouth, okay. Yeah, we have, for those of you who have Mayflower ancestors, we have a Mayflower Project. We have the NSDAR, the National Daughters of the American Revolution. So a lot of the heritage societies use DNA testing. So there's thousands of testers, and there's just only so many hours in the day to actually put all that stuff together. You start looking at your various lines and testing various lines. I've got a few of mine tested, but then putting the data together with it can be a challenge because it is time consuming.
Yes. Okay. Do we have any other questions for Janine? Because we're fortunate to have her with us today, and we do appreciate it.